The cell on Sorvith Station measured 4 meters by 3, a fact Gabriel had confirmed 17 times using the length of his own foot as a unit of measurement. 11 days of confinement produces a certain relationship with precision. He knew the recycled air completed one full circulation cycle every 40 minutes because he had counted. He knew the guard rotation changed at 6-hour intervals because the second shift always brought someone who walked heavier on the left side, a rhythmic asymmetry that traveled through the floor before it arrived at the door. He knew the wall to his right held a faint warmth after the station's artificial noon, conducted through the hull from whatever machinery lived on the other side. He had learned all of this not because it was useful, but because the alternative was sitting with his own thoughts, and his thoughts had not been particularly good company since the arrest. The charge was technical interference with a licensed navigation relay. What it actually was a favor for a cargo pilot named Das who had needed a small adjustment made to avoid a customs checkpoint that would have found something in his hold that Das had described as personal, and Gabriel had understood to mean profitable. Gabriel had made the adjustment. Das had cleared the checkpoint. Das was, presumably, somewhere in the outer belt enjoying the proceeds of whatever personal item he had been transporting, while Gabriel was here, measuring his cell in foot lengths and developing opinions about air circulation. He was on his 34th count of ceiling tiles. There were 22, a number he found personally offensive given that 24 would have completed a satisfying grid. When the door opened at a time that belonged to no guard rotation he had catalogued. She entered without escort. This alone was enough to make Gabriel sit up, because everything on Sorvith Station moved with escort. The station operated under a security protocol that required even maintenance personnel to travel in pairs, a policy that had always struck Gabriel as less about safety and more about ensuring that if something went wrong, there would be a witness to assign blame to. The woman who stepped into his cell had apparently decided that this policy, like most constraints, was something that applied to other people. She was tall, unhurried, dressed in a deep charcoal that absorbed the cell's fluorescent light rather than reflecting it. Her skin was white in the way of certain moons, not pale, not washed out, but carrying its own quiet luminosity, as though light was something she produced rather than received. Her ears rose from beneath dark hair and tapered to long, elegant points that gave her profile the look of someone who could, if she chose, hear a conversation happening in the next corridor. She surveyed the cell with the expression of a person who has inspected better rooms and worse ones, and formed no particular judgment about either. She sat in the cell's single chair as though it had been placed there for her. Gabriel remained on the cot and said nothing, because he had learned that the person who speaks first in an unexpected situation is usually the one who ends up explaining themselves. She studied him for a moment with the focused attention of someone checking a photograph against its subject. "Your file says you speak Sorvith Standard without an accent," she said. "It also says you acquired it in 14 months, which the linguistics division found improbable enough to flag." "I have a good ear," Gabriel said. "Apparently." She settled back slightly, not relaxing so much as deciding that the posture of formality had served its purpose. "I am Lyra. I govern this station and the 3 territorial sectors attached to it, a fact I mention not to impress you, but because the context is relevant to what I am about to say." Gabriel looked at her. Then he looked at the door which had no visible guards beyond it. Then he looked back at her. "You're the queen," he said. "Yes. You came to my cell." "Also yes." "Alone." She glanced briefly at the empty doorway and back at him, with the expression of a woman making considerable effort to be patient. "I find escorts create an atmosphere that is not conducive to honest conversation. What I have to say to you requires honesty, so I came alone. I would appreciate it if you treated that as a practical decision rather than an occasion for extended observation." Gabriel decided that this was reasonable and said nothing further on the subject. She outlined the situation then, not circling it, not building toward it, but presenting it with the clean directness of a person who has already done every deliberation this proposal required, and has arrived here only to deliver the conclusion. Her daughter, widowed, 2 years of grief that had stopped moving and become instead a place Sierra lived in, a fixed address rather than a passage through. Gabriel's file had come to her attention through channels she did not specify. The particular combination of qualities it described, she did not enumerate them and he did not ask, had brought her to this cell rather than any of the others the station currently held occupied. He listened to all of it. He was, by nature and by 11 days of enforced practice, a patient listener. When she finished, he had one question. "Does she know?" He said. "Yes," Lyra said, without hesitation, without qualification, in the tone of a woman who considers lying a poor use of everyone's time. He looked at the ceiling. 22 tiles, still offensive. "When does it begin?" he said. It was not quite a question. Lyra stood, smoothed nothing from her charcoal jacket, and moved toward the door with the unhurried certainty of a woman whose decisions, once made, have the structural integrity of load-bearing walls. "The cell door will be open in the morning," she said. She left him with the specific, wide-awake sleeplessness of a man whose future has just been comprehensively rearranged by someone who did not ask if he had questions about the architecture. He had several. He saved them for morning. The door was open at 600, as promised. Gabriel stood in the doorway for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, not because he doubted it, but because 11 days of a locked door creates a certain relationship with thresholds. The corridor beyond was empty except for a young station officer, who was making a focused effort to look as though he had not been waiting specifically for Gabriel to emerge. He was not entirely successful. He had the posture of someone who had been given an assignment that came directly from someone important, and was experiencing the particular anxiety of not wanting to be the point at which that assignment went wrong. "Mr. Gabriel," he said, and then stopped, apparently having prepared that part and not the rest. "That's me," Gabriel said, which seemed to help. The officer, he introduced himself as Wren. No rank offered, which Gabriel filed away as interesting, led him through a station that looked different from the outside of custody than it had from inside it. Sorvith Station was large enough to have districts, each one pressurized and lit according to the preferences of its primary occupants. The detention block existed in a permanent institutional gray, the lighting calibrated to the specific frequency that suggests authority without warmth. The corridor Wren led him through now shifted gradually, the walls taking on the deep blue-black of a material Gabriel didn't recognize, the lighting warming by degrees until it approached something that a reasonable person might call pleasant. The station's central hub rose above them as they walked, a vaulted space filled with the quiet industry of people who moved as though their purposes were settled, the transit lines running overhead in smooth silence, the whole infrastructure operating with the composed efficiency of a system that had been well designed and was aware of the fact. Wren brought him to a suite on the station's inner ring and handed him a credential chip without ceremony. Gabriel turned it over in his hand. It was a different color from the civilian standard. He looked at Wren. "Provisional residential access," Wren said, "and the engineering subsystems. The Queen's office added the second clearance this morning." He said this in the tone of someone reporting a fact that surprised him, but that he had decided was not his business to question. Gabriel looked at the chip again. Engineering subsystems access on Sorvith Station covered approximately 40% of the infrastructure that kept 12,000 people alive and in breathable atmosphere. He had been in custody 4 hours ago. He thought about saying something about this, and decided that the morning had already contained enough observations about things that were technically remarkable. He thanked Wren, who looked relieved, and went inside. The suite was larger than any space he had occupied in the previous 3 years of his life, a comparison that said something unflattering about the previous 3 years rather than something remarkable about the suite. It was furnished with the restrained good taste of an environment that has been designed by someone with standards and executed by someone with a budget sufficient to meet them. There was a viewport. Through it, the local star was positioned at the exact angle that made the station's outer ring glow along its edges, the whole structure lit from one side in amber, the rest falling into the particular darkness of deep space that is not empty so much as full of distance. Gabriel stood at the viewport for a while, for no reason more complicated than that he had not seen a window in 11 days and windows, it turned out, were something he had missed. He was still standing there when a knock arrived at his door at a time that suggested it had been scheduled. The woman who entered when he opened it was not Lyra. She was, he understood immediately and without being told, Sira. She was shorter than her mother, and where Lyra carried her authority in the set of her shoulders, the composure of someone accustomed to being the fixed point in any room, Sira carried something quieter and harder to name. Her ears tapered to the same long points, dark hair pushed back from them with the carelessness of someone who has not spent the morning thinking about appearances. She was dressed practically, in the way of a person who had somewhere to be before this and would have somewhere to be after. She looked at Gabriel with the careful attention of someone who has agreed to something and is now, for the first time, measuring the agreement against its reality. There was a pause that lasted approximately 1 second longer than comfortable. "You're taller than your file photo," she said. "I was having a bad posture day," Gabriel said. She looked at him. Something moved briefly across her expression, not quite amusement, not quite its absence. "My mother explained the arrangement," she said. "Mine did too," he said. "Same night, different cell, she's efficient." Sierra studied him for another moment, with the focused quality of someone reading a document carefully before signing it. Then she stepped inside, not as though she was making herself at home, but as though she had decided that the conversation they needed to have required a room rather than a doorway. She sat, and she told him what she needed from this arrangement in the same direct, unornamented way that apparently ran in her family. Not performance, not negotiation, but the particular honesty of a person who has decided that pretending requires more energy than she currently has available. She needed time. She needed someone who would not treat her grief as a problem requiring solution. She needed, she said, with the careful precision of someone choosing words that are exactly true and no more, the appearance of a life moving forward, for reasons that were political and therefore not particularly romantic, but were nonetheless real. Gabriel listened to all of it. Then he said, "I should tell you that I accidentally agreed to chair a Water Reclamation Council session this morning. I don't know how it happened. The form was in my credential packet, and I thought I was signing for the room." Sierra looked at him. "That session," she said slowly, "has been contested for 8 months. I'm sure it'll be fine," Gabriel said, with the confidence of a man who was not sure at all. Outside, the station continued its orbit, indifferent and vast, and somewhere in its administrative system, Gabriel's name now appeared on a document that would cause 3 separate political offices a significant amount of distress before the week was finished. The Water Reclamation Council session was held 3 days later in a chamber on the station's administrative level that had been designed to make everyone inside it feel that their concerns were being taken seriously. It achieved this through high ceilings and poor acoustics, a combination that ensured every statement echoed long enough to sound important before dissolving into the ventilation system. Gabriel arrived 4 minutes early, which he had calculated as the precise interval that communicated preparedness without suggesting he had nothing else to do. He sat at the head of the table, which was a long oval of dark composite that reflected the overhead lighting in a way that made everyone's face look slightly more serious than it actually was. There were 9 council members. They filed in with the measured energy of people who had been arguing about something for 8 months and had developed, in that time, deeply personal relationships with their own positions. They looked at Gabriel with the unified expression of 9 people who had expected, at minimum, a bureaucrat with relevant experience, and had received instead someone whose credential chip still had the faint smell of a printing facility that was less than 72 hours old. The session opened. Gabriel had read everything in the credential packet the night before, a document dense enough that he had needed 3 cups of something the sweets dispenser called coffee, and that bore only a philosophical relationship to the thing he had grown up drinking. He understood the dispute now in its technical dimensions. 2 competing filtration proposals, one backed by the station's engineering division, and one backed by an external contractor with apparent connections to 2 of the 9 people currently staring at him. The technical difference between them was marginal. The political difference was substantial enough that it had produced 8 months of contested sessions and at least one formal complaint that had made it to Lyra's office. He let them speak. This was not a strategic decision so much as a recognition that the 9 people in the room had things to say and had been waiting, with accumulating pressure, for someone to say them too. He listened with the complete attention he had developed in the cell, the kind of focus that emerges when external stimulation is rationed, and the mind learns to treat incoming information as something valuable simply by virtue of its arrival. An hour in, a council member named Preth, who represented the engineering division's position with the passionate investment of someone who had written the original proposal and considered any criticism of it a personal remark, leaned forward and asked Gabriel directly which filtration system he found more compelling. Gabriel looked at the schematics on the table display. He looked at Preth. He looked at the 2 members across the table whose body language had shifted forward at the question. The redundancy architecture in the first proposal is stronger, he said, but the power draw is going to interact badly with the grid fluctuations you've been logging on the inner ring. The second proposal solves that problem, but creates a pressure differential in sectors 9 through 12 that someone has decided not to put in the summary document and is hoping nobody notices. There was a silence. The 2 members across from Preth looked at their table displays with the focused attention of people discovering something very interesting in the middle distance. That differential is within acceptable parameters, one of them said. Acceptable for what? Gabriel asked, with genuine curiosity. The session ran 40 minutes over its scheduled time. At the end of it, Gabriel proposed a third approach that borrowed the redundancy architecture from the first proposal and addressed the power draw issue with a grid scheduling adjustment that the engineering division had apparently considered and not mentioned, for reasons that the engineering division's representative was now being asked to explain by 2 of his colleagues simultaneously. Gabriel left them to it, gathered his documents, and walked into the corridor where Sira was standing with the expression of someone who had heard the session was running long and had come to observe the reason. You proposed a third option, she said. The other 2 had problems. 8 months of sessions, and you proposed a third option on your first appearance. I had a lot of time to read the packet. He paused. Also, the second proposal's pressure differential would have caused a detectable hum in the residential sectors within about 4 months. I find hums distracting. Sira looked at him for a moment with the careful, measuring quality he was beginning to recognize as her particular form of attention. Then she fell into step beside him as he walked, not because she had decided to accompany him so much as because they were both moving in the same direction, and stopping would have required a decision she hadn't made. Preth is going to send you a very long message, she said. I assumed. He once sent my mother a 17-page document because she used the word proposal. In a context he felt implied his original proposal was one of several options rather than the clear frontrunner. How many pages do you think I get? You restructured the entire framework of his 8-month position in 40 minutes, Sira said. I would clear storage space. They walked in the particular quiet of 2 people who have discovered, without arranging it, that the other one is tolerable to be near. The station moved around them, transit lines above, the soft percussion of the environmental systems, The distant sound of the outer ring's activity carried through the hull in faint vibration. A maintenance drone passed overhead, cataloging something in the ceiling infrastructure with the patient industry of a machine that has no opinion about the political situation it is floating through. Gabriel looked up at it. "What's the maintenance cycle on those?" he said. "Every 60 hours on the administrative level," Sira said. Then, as though the words had arrived before she decided to say them, "You actually want to know?" "I have engineering access," he said. "It seems irresponsible not to use it." She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, but the quieter quiet of someone revising what they had been about to say into something more accurate. "The inner ring drones are on a different cycle," she said. "They've been logging something in Corridor 7 for 3 weeks, and nobody has looked at it yet." "What kind of something?" "The report says an unclassified resonance pattern." Gabriel stopped walking. Sira stopped a half step after, and turned back to look at him with the patient expression of someone waiting to see what variety of problem she has just introduced into her afternoon. "That's not a maintenance issue," he said. "No," she agreed. "That's a structural harmonic. If it's in Corridor 7, it's interacting with the load bearing." "Yes," she said, "I know." He looked at her. She looked back with the expression of a person who has known about a problem for 3 weeks and has been waiting, with a patience she would not describe as comfortable, for someone with the right clearance and the inclination to actually do something about it. "Show me," he said. She did. Corridor 7 was on the inner ring's residential level, a stretch of the station that had been built in an earlier expansion and retained, in its walls and floors, the slightly different material signature of a different construction era. Gabriel could feel the difference before he saw it, a faint change in the way sound moved, a subtle shift in the resonance of his own footsteps that the body registers before the mind catches up. Sira walked beside him with the quiet of someone who has been here before and has spent that time noticing things rather than resolving them. The maintenance drone's logged coordinates brought them to a section of corridor that looked, to any casual inspection, entirely unremarkable. The wall panels were the same deep blue-black of the inner ring's standard finish. The lighting was even. There was nothing visible to suggest that anything in this stretch of corridor had developed opinions about the structural load it was managing. Gabriel put his hand flat against the wall. He felt it immediately, a slow, periodic oscillation, deep enough that it bypassed the fingertips and registered somewhere in the forearm. Not a vibration in the mechanical sense, not the purposeful hum of a system doing its work, but something that had the quality of an argument being conducted at a frequency just below the threshold of language. "How long has this actually been building?" he said. "The drone first logged an anomaly 9 weeks ago," Sira said. "The report was filed, reviewed, categorized as non-critical, and assigned to the General Maintenance Queue." "The General Maintenance Queue," Gabriel said, in the tone of a man confirming information that he finds both understandable and catastrophic. "It is a long queue," Sira said. He pulled out the credential chip, connected it to the wall panel's diagnostic port, and spent 3 minutes reading data that the maintenance system had been accumulating with the patient, unacknowledged diligence of a system that reports what it finds and does not follow up. The harmonic was not random. It had a pattern, a structural resonance that was building in slow increments, interacting with the inner ring's rotation compensation system in a way that was, at current trajectory, going to express itself as something significantly more dramatic than a hum in approximately 6 to 8 weeks. He explained this to Sira in terms that were accurate without being designed to alarm, which was a balance he had developed some practice with in previous engineering work that had also involved discovering problems that other people had decided were queue items. Sira listened with the complete unperformed attention he had come to associate with her. When he finished, she said, "What do you need? Not what does this mean, not are you certain, not how serious is serious. What do you need?" Gabriel filed this away with the same quiet efficiency with which he filed everything that told him something true about a person. Access to the compensation system's calibration controls in about 4 hours, he said. And someone needs to inform whatever office is responsible for this section that the Q item has been promoted. I'll handle the office, Sira said, with the particular flatness of someone who has handled offices before and has feelings about it that they have chosen not to elaborate on. She stepped aside and made a call on her communicator, a brief, quiet exchange that Gabriel caught only in fragments, enough to understand that the office in question was being informed of the situation by someone whose name produced, on the other end of the call, a rapid shift in administrative urgency. She returned to where he was working with the expression of a task completed to a standard she found acceptable. They're sending someone to log the reclassification, she said. He sounded like he needed a moment. How many moments? I told him he had 10 minutes. Gabriel looked at her sideways. She looked back with the composed expression of a woman who has been raised by Lyra and has absorbed, through proximity and example, a functional understanding of how long people actually need when they are told they have 10 minutes. He worked. Sira did not leave, which he had half expected her to do. She sat against the opposite wall with the settled quality of someone who has made a decision about where they are going to be and is not reconsidering it, and she watched him work with the interested attention of a person who finds the thing being done genuinely worth watching. She asked questions occasionally, precise, technical questions that told him she understood more of the underlying systems than her role required her to, that the knowledge was personal rather than administrative, accumulated through the particular curiosity of someone who lives on a station and has decided to understand the thing she lives inside. You know this system, he said at one point without looking up from the calibration interface. My husband helped design the compensation retrofit, she said, 4 years ago. I spent a lot of time in corridors like this one, handing him tools he'd describe by function rather than name because he could never remember what engineers called them. She said it evenly without the careful construction of someone handling fragile material. It was a fact, offered in the context of a fact. Gabriel received it the same way. What did he call this one? Gabriel said, holding up the calibration probe. Sira looked at it. Something moved across her expression that was not quite a smile and not quite its memory, but occupied the space between them with a warmth that was entirely its own. The pointy connector thing, she said. That's technically accurate, Gabriel said. He was an excellent engineer and a terrible nomenclaturist. Gabriel returned to the calibration. The resonance pattern on his diagnostic display was shifting incrementally as he worked, the slow oscillation losing its periodicity, the numbers moving in the direction of a system that has been listened to and corrected. It was the part of engineering work he had always found quietly satisfying, not the dramatic intervention, not the crisis resolved at the last possible moment, but the patient adjustment that addresses something before it becomes the other kind of story. An hour into the work, the reclassification officer arrived, a man of late middle age who had the expression of someone who had been in a meeting about something else and had been extracted from it with insufficient explanation. He looked at Gabriel, he looked at Sira, he looked at the diagnostic display with the expression of a person reading a document in a language they speak imperfectly. I was told this was a Q item, he said. It was, Gabriel agreed. It graduated. The officer looked at the display again. The harmonic index is at. Yes, Gabriel said. And the compensation system's calibration drift is. Also yes. The officer stood quietly for a moment with the expression of a man revising several recent decisions. Then he produced a tablet, logged the reclassification with the speed of someone who has understood that the queue has made an error and would like to put some administrative distance between himself and that error, and left with the purposeful walk of a person going directly to have a conversation with the queue. Sira watched him go, You do that very well, she said. What? Answer questions that haven't finished being asked. Gabriel looked at the diagnostic display, where the numbers were settling toward a range that would allow the corridor to continue its existence without further editorial comment. 11 days in a cell, he said. You learn to hear where things are going. Sierra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, does it work on people as well as structural harmonics? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Sometimes, he said, people are less consistent than load-bearing walls. She laughed. It was a small sound, brief and unannounced, the kind that arrives before the person producing it has decided to allow it, and it disappeared quickly into the corridor's improved acoustics. But it had been there. Gabriel noted it with the same careful attention he gave to diagnostic readings that indicated a system moving, slowly and against considerable inertia, in a better direction. 3 weeks into his residence on Sorvith Station, Gabriel received the message from Preth. It was 23 pages long. He read all of it, which he considered an act of professional courtesy, and which Sierra, when he told her, considered an act of either discipline or masochism, and said she was not certain which. The message covered, in exhaustive and occasionally repetitive detail, the history of the water reclamation proposal, the qualifications of its authors, the procedural irregularities of Gabriel's intervention, and a closing section that was technically a summary but read more like a man working through something in real time. Gabriel composed a 4-sentence response that acknowledged the concerns, confirmed the technical adjustments were proceeding, and thanked Preth for the thoroughness of his documentation. Preth did not reply, which Gabriel interpreted as either satisfaction or the need for more time, and either way represented an improvement over 23 pages. The station had begun to feel, in ways he registered but did not examine too directly, like somewhere he lived rather than somewhere he had been placed. This was a subtle distinction and an important one. The engineering access had given him a relationship with the station's infrastructure that was specific and personal in the way that understanding a complex system always becomes personal. He knew which transit lines ran slightly warm in the mornings due to a power distribution pattern nobody had bothered to rebalance. He knew the environmental system in the residential wing cycled with a 4-second irregularity that produced no practical consequence, but offended him on principle. He knew Corridor 7's walls were now silent in the clean, settled way of a structure that has been properly heard. He and Sierra had developed, without discussing it, a loose architecture of shared time. Mornings she worked, and he worked, and the suite existed in the productive quiet of two people who are separately occupied in the same space. In the late afternoons, she sometimes appeared in the corridor outside his workroom, with a question that was occasionally about the station's systems, and occasionally about something else entirely, and he answered both kinds with the same attention. They ate dinner together 4 nights out of 7, a frequency that had established itself without negotiation. It was at one of these dinners in the 5th week that she talked about Kale. She did not announce it. There was no transition that marked the conversation as different from the ones before it. They were discussing the station's outer ring expansion plans, a project that had been proposed and deferred 3 times in the last decade. And she said, in the same register she had been using to discuss structural projections, that Kale had been the one who finally made the expansion mathematics work. That the solution had come to him at the dinner table, and he had written it on the edge of a napkin, because his tablet was in the other room and the idea, in his assessment, could not be trusted to survive the walk. Gabriel did not adjust his expression. He did not produce the careful arrangement of sympathy that the moment might have invited. He simply said, "Did the napkin survive?" Sierra looked at him. "Yes," she said, "it's in my desk. The expansion committee asked for the original calculations, and I gave them a copy because the napkin has a sauce stain that I felt was private." "Reasonable," Gabriel said. She was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet she made some internal decision he was not privy to, and then she continued. not with the formal structure of a grief being shared, not with the careful management of a person controlling how much they reveal, but with the ordinary texture of someone talking about a person they knew well, the specific details that eulogy omits, because it is trying to say something large and specific details are small, but the specific details are where a person actually lives. Cale had cataloged stars by the sounds of their names rather than their coordinates, a system that was scientifically useless and personally comprehensive. He had maintained strong and largely unfounded opinions about the correct temperature for the station's residential lighting. He had been constitutionally incapable of leaving a malfunctioning system alone, which had made him an excellent engineer and a difficult dinner companion when the dining hall's ventilation made a sound he found irregular. There was an argument, she said, that they had not finished. Not a serious one. The kind that exists in long relationships as a recurring thread, picked up and set down, never resolved because resolution would require one of them to be entirely wrong and neither of them was. She had thought about the unfinished argument more than the finished ones, which she said with the precision of someone who has examined this fact from several angles and arrived at the conclusion that it is simply true. Gabriel listened to all of it in the way he had learned to listen, not gathering it, not preparing a response to it, but receiving it in the complete and uncomplicated way of someone who understands that being heard is its own thing, separate from being answered. When she finished, the dinner table held a silence that was not uncomfortable. Outside the viewport, the station's outer ring traced its slow geometry against the dark, the running lights of a departing transport moving through the middle distance like a thought leaving a room. The unfinished ones stay longer, Gabriel said. That's not a flaw in the argument, that's just how it works. Sierra looked at him with the focused quality of someone checking whether a thing has been understood or merely repeated. Whatever she found appeared to satisfy the check. You're not in a hurry, she said. It was the same thing she had said in the first week, but it meant something different now, or meant the same thing from a shorter distance. No, he said. She nodded once slowly, in the manner of someone confirming a measurement they had already taken but wanted to verify. Then she looked back at the viewport, at the transport's running lights now small enough to be mistaken for a fixed star, and she said, he would have sent Preth 30 pages. Gabriel considered this. Competitive, he said. Thorough, she said, and the word carried the particular warmth of someone using an accurate description as a form of love, and Gabriel understood that this was the closest thing to an introduction he was going to receive, and that it was, in the specific way that true things are, enough. He refilled her glass. She did not comment on this but did not move the glass away, which he had come to understand was her particular idiom for acceptance, not announced, not performed, but present in the action of remaining. The environmental system cycled overhead with its 4-second irregularity. Gabriel noticed it as he always did and said nothing about it, which cost him something small, and which he paid without complaint, because there are systems you correct and systems you learn to live alongside, and knowing the difference is most of the work. 6 weeks after the cell door opened, Gabriel fixed the environmental system's 4-second irregularity. He had not planned to. He had, in fact, developed what he privately considered a principled position on leaving it alone, a decision he had framed to himself in professional terms about prioritizing structural concerns over cosmetic ones, and which was, if he was being precise about it, nothing more complicated than not wanting to remove the last thing in the suite that required him to practice patience. But on a Tuesday morning, with Sierra working in the next room and the station cycling through its artificial dawn outside the viewport, he heard the irregularity and found that his hand was already reaching for the panel before his reasoning had caught up with the action. It took 11 minutes. The cause was a timing desynchronization in the residential wing's secondary circulation relay, a small and correctable thing that had been producing its 4-second disruption with the patient persistence of a minor error that has never been asked to stop. When he closed the panel, The system ran clean and even, and the suite was quieter in a way that was objectively better and that he stood in for a moment noticing, with the particular awareness of someone who has repaired something and must now decide how to feel about the absence of what was there before. Sierra appeared in the doorway. She had the look of someone who has registered a change in the ambient sound of a space and has come to identify it. "You fixed it," she said. "It was time," he said. She considered this with the expression of someone receiving information on two levels simultaneously and finding both accurate. Then she went back to her work, and he went back to his, and the suite continued around them in its corrected quiet. Lyra came that afternoon. She arrived the way she always arrived, without announcement, without escort, with the composed authority of a woman who considers the concept of a surprise visit applicable only to people who have something to hide, and has therefore never been surprised by one herself. She sat in the suite's main room with the settled quality of someone who has allocated exactly the time this conversation requires, and not a minute beyond it. And she looked at Gabriel with the assessing attention she had turned on him in the cell 7 weeks prior. The difference was that this time it did not have the quality of a review, it had the quality of a confirmation. "The water reclamation system is operational," she said, "ahead of schedule. Preth has submitted a formal commendation, which I mention because it is the first time in 11 years he has submitted one. And I want you to understand the full weight of what you've apparently done to the man." "I answered his message," Gabriel said. 4 sentences, Lyra said. "They were good sentences." Lyra regarded him with the expression of a woman exercising restraint. "The Corridor 7 harmonic has been resolved. The compensation system is running within parameters it hasn't seen since the original installation. The reclassification office has apparently conducted an internal review of their queue management procedures, which 3 separate department heads have told me was necessary, and which nobody had previously been willing to initiate." She paused. "You have been here 7 weeks. I had a lot to catch up on," Gabriel said. 11 days in a cell is motivating." Lyra was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone choosing between several things they could say and selecting the one that is most true. "My daughter laughed at dinner 2 nights ago," she said. "Ren heard it from the corridor and reported it to me because he was uncertain whether it was something I should know about and decided, correctly, that it was." Gabriel said nothing. "I came to tell you," Lyra continued, "that the provisional status on your credentials has been removed as of this morning. Your residential access is permanent. Your engineering clearance has been expanded to cover the full station infrastructure." She said this with the clean efficiency of someone delivering terms, and then she did something he had not seen her do before. She stopped. And in the stop, there was something that was not quite sentiment but was adjacent to it, close enough that he could see it without her having to name it. "I also came to tell you that the arrangement, as I originally described it, has concluded." Gabriel looked at her. "The arrangement," he said carefully, "that brought me here." "Yes." She met his eyes with the directness that was simply her natural register. "What exists now is not an arrangement. I wanted you to know the difference because you are the sort of person who tracks these things, and I am the sort of person who prefers them named accurately." She stood, smoothed nothing from her jacket, and moved toward the door. At the threshold she paused, which was unusual enough that he attended to it. "She kept the napkin," Lyra said, "for 2 years before she showed it to anyone." She did not elaborate on what this meant or why she had said it, and she was gone before he could decide whether a response was required. He sat with that for a while. Sierra found him at the viewport an hour later, which was where he went when something required thinking about, and the thinking was the kind that benefits from distance and the indifferent scale of open space. She stood beside him without asking what he was looking at, because she had spent enough time at this viewport to understand that what a person looks at and what they are seeing are not always the same thing. Outside, the station's outer ring moved through its slow rotation, the running lights of 3 transports visible in the middle distance, the local star positioned at the angle that lit the station's edges in amber. It was, Gabriel thought, a view he had looked at enough times now to have opinions about, to notice when the light was different, to have a preference. "Your mother came," he said. "I know," Sierra said. "She told me she was going to." "That she told you what she was going to say?" "She told me she was going to say something true and that I should be in a different room when she said it." Sierra looked at the viewport. "She has a methodology. I've noticed." They stood in the quiet of the corrected suite, the environmental system running even and clean above them. Outside, one of the transports completed its departure vector and folded into the compression lane, its running lights vanishing in the specific way of a ship that has become, in an instant, somewhere else entirely. Gabriel had spent 3 years moving like that, from place to place, with the velocity of someone who has not yet located the thing that makes staying feel different from stopping. He had one question. He had been carrying it for 2 weeks, turning it over in the way he turned over engineering problems, checking it from different angles, testing its load-bearing capacity before committing weight to it. "I have one question," he said. Sierra turned to look at him with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to arrive and is now watching it come through the door. "I know," she said. "You don't know what it is." "You've been thinking about it for 2 weeks," she said. "You get a particular look. You had it the morning you fixed the relay and you've had it most evenings since." He looked at her. She looked back with the patient, clear attention of a woman who has learned, through the specific education of loss and time and 47 dinners shared with someone who answers questions before they finish being asked. That presence is not the same as permanence, but is the necessary condition of it. He asked. She answered without hesitation, in the same direct, unornamented way she had answered every true thing, not as conclusion, but as beginning, which is what true answers are when they arrive at the right time. Outside, Sorvith Station continued its orbit, vast and indifferent and full of people whose lives were proceeding in the ordinary, extraordinary way of lives that are being lived rather than waited out. The transit lines ran overhead in smooth silence. In Corridor 7, the walls held their quiet. In the water reclamation system, clean water moved through pipes that had been correctly understood. In the administrative system, Preth was composing something that was, for the first time in his career, a single page. In the suite on the inner ring, the environmental system ran without interruption, even and clean, and the 4-second silence it had carried for nobody knew how long was gone, replaced by the steady, unbroken sound of a place that has been listened to and corrected and stayed in.